Hi guys, how are you doing? It is Dom here from Soundsphere. I had the wonderful opportunity of chatting to Kyle Scarborough, who is of course part of Scarborough Studios and a tattooist, an acclaimed tattooist across the US, known for his work on the original ideas and the sketches of the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, and of course his friendship with Bray with Windham. We talk about his work in AEW with Malakai Black and the House of Black. We talk about what he thinks of the current product, the Uncle Howdy stuff, the Wyatt Six stuff, his music taste, and so much more. But there's some lovely moments here where Kyle goes into his friendship with Windham and his memories of working with Bray Windham in WWE for the Fiend stuff and that process. So it was absolutely wonderful to do this interview. It's a pleasure to bring it to you. Thank you so much to Kyle for his time, and thank you so much to you guys for watching. Really appreciate you. We'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. I've wanted to chat to you for a very long time. I love your tattoo work and your creativity. But I always there's some questions around wrestling, which I know some of them have been answered. Obviously, you've documented your work with Bray Wyatt and you've done some stuff with AEW, which we'll touch on. But first off, what kind of music are you into? What kind of stuff did you kind of grow up on? And has that music changed since, like I say, because I guess
Yeah,
music and tattooing and the culture have always been kind of intrinsically linked. So do you kind of have bands that you've always listened to, artists that you've always listened to?
that's a loaded question. I think it's funny when you're stateside here, when you're a Midwesterner, central state area, the middle of the country, you're kind of exposed to everything. So I feel like you're hard pressed to find people who like sort of find that one niche. And so when you get a lot of people who say, "Well, I listen to a lot of different stuff," and that certainly applies to myself as well. So it completely depends. What is a good? I don't know. It's different eras and different times. I grew up in the as a early '80s, so this comes with that certain appreciation of music from that time period, stuff that I grew up with that my parents listened to. Um, a lot of blues rock, blues heavy stuff. My mom unfortunately isn't with us anymore. Was a massive fan of Eric Clapton and Cream. Um, Stevie Ray Vaughan, like I said, a lot of blues music, Americana stuff. Still listen to a lot of that, but I have my affinity for '80s and '90s hip hop stuff. Massive Wu-Tang Clan fan, and all that good that comes with that. I'm a massive sucker for like retro wave music and that nostalgic '80s kind of quality. Actually, one of my absolute favorite bands, and I've yet to meet anyone who knows who they are because they're still fairly small. I don't remember exactly where they're located at over in the UK, but they're called LeBrock.
Okay. Yeah,
One
look
of
them up.
their Yeah, it's kind of named after Kelly LeBrock, the old '80s actress and whatnot, and it's all that kind of sound. I highly recommend one of their. I think it's a singer. His name's Sean. He's actually a tattoo artist. I don't quite remember where they're at over there either, like I said, but yeah, I'll listen to that quite a bit. It just kind of depends, whatever grabs the mood. Music in the gym might be something else. Music at work could be something. So, man, it's all over the place.
Yeah. Do you have like if I was to challenge you, I remember doing this with Malachi Black actually, and it was difficult for him because his music taste was again all over the place. Do you have like a top three artists that you could give me right now on the spot, or is that like too difficult for you?
Top three artists on the spot. I'm trying to think about. Let's say okay. I'd say the most consistently heavily rotated I've been listening to. So I will say again, LeBrock. And I don't think they put out anything that I haven't enjoyed. There's another band out of Ohio here called Camp, spelled CAAMP. I'm sounding a bit like a hipster right now. I feel bad, like I'm trying to be. It's not true. And that was a
Uh,
band that came across my wife. It's kind of a, I don't know how I would describe that music really. Again, I guess I could call it kind of Americana style, but that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So three.
I've done it, haven't
Yeah,
I? I've made it difficult for you. Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
a little bit, a little
All
bit.
right. We'll chat.
What about
I'll change it up for you, man. Okay. What's the best live band you've ever seen? Best live artist you've ever seen?
that is a really good question. Boy, I tell you what, let me see. I don't know what some people measure live music by. I think first and foremost, if your music performed live can be as good, if not better, than listening to it on the album. a real musician or a real singer. We saw Gary Clark Jr. as a current present day blues artist. He was phenomenal.
Beautiful. Yeah.
My wife's also a massive fan of Maynard and Tool and all those. We've seen Tool and Pussifer. We're very, and I didn't even know him half as well as anyone else. I was there as a bit of a plus one. I don't pretend to be hyper knowledgeable, and I grew up with it. I knew it was, but that was also phenomenal. And like I just said, camp. We got to see them here around St. Louis some months back, and fantastic show. Avett Brothers, another again Americana type a band. Jason Isbell was another one. I know I'm forgetting a bunch already, but been pretty fortunate. All the live acts that we've gone and seen have been really enjoyable live, and one that because they performed at the big stadium, Scott Trade Center, where the Blues play hockey in St. Louis, was back at Mumford and Sons. That was a fun show. I can't even lie. So we've kind of lucky. Anytime we've seen a live show, it's been pretty quality. So
I respect that. I respect you giving props to Mumford and Sons. I've found that every time I've seen a band where I thought I was going to hate it, like Elton John was incredible live. Nickelback I saw, and I was like, I'm going to hate this, but actually it's a great show. And
there you go.
Yeah, you say it's interesting, isn't it? How these things can surprise you. Do you sort of differentiate, because you mentioned music at work? I've been in tattoo studios where they're playing like 90s bangers all the way through, but they all look like big metalheads. All the tattooists look like big metalheads, but they play like 90s pop. Like, do you listen to the same stuff? Is it your playlist, or do you differentiate when you're at work, or do you listen to stuff that you love when you're working?
The best part about what I do is that I'm by myself. I just have a private studio space, so I'm in prime control of everything. Actually, it's pretty rare that I would just play music while working. More often than not, I have on some sort of movies or documentaries or whatnot. When I get, client comes in and we're working on a project that relates to, let's say, comic book, a whole leg sleeve of comic book characters, and they're Batman related, and I'm a massive Batman fan. Then, you got sky's the limit. I'll play movies or whatnot, or play gameplay, stuff like that. And people getting the Harry Potter tattoos, same thing. So usually I'll dial in the films that we're watching based around the subject matter, if it is pop culture related to what we're working on. Horror films, of course, and that can run the gamut. And I do that quite frequently. If not, I'm a bit of a white girl. I like my true crime stuff. I always have. So podcasts and whatnot. Sometimes I'm not a massive podcast listener, but I do have my few. So more often than not, it's like, documentaries and whatnot, and which for me, my clients seem to appreciate. They're able to sit and kind of just find something that takes their attention. I think even with music playing, you're in the moment, you're lost in your own thoughts. But if you have something to kind of watch or pay attention to, it's a distraction. So my studio is more like a living room.
That sounds great, man.
Yeah. It's not a typical tattoo shop whatsoever. It's just it's really just kind of like all of my 43 years of existence on this earth have kind of blown up in this one creative space, and it's just, hopefully it's comfortable and pretty low key for people. So it's a place to relax more than anything. So don't really do the loud, aggressive music. I actually don't like tattoo shops where I don't know why you'd want to get tattooed if you're listening to overly stimulating, loud, aggressive music. That's always been my confusion, but here we are. So
that's a really interesting point, because I'm thinking back now, like I've never been in a tattoo shop. At least, I mean, I'm obviously they may be different, but certainly the ones I've been to has always been really heavy music. I think I've only been in one that had like a TV on, and it had like, just general kind of daytime TV on. But the idea of watching a movie really appeals to me. It's like a sensory stimulation thing. Like, it's just,
it is.
It's especially if you're working on a project that ties in with it. It feels immersive, Kyle.
Yeah, right. It does. People seem to respond that way to it.
Yeah, man. If I ever get over there, I'll book in with you. I've got some ideas, and I'd like to just watch a movie and chill when I'm when I'm being tattooed, for sure, man. Well, thank you for that insight. I have to ask, because you said this over email. Now, I am a long-suffering soccer fan, because I support Hull City, and they do not have
the Tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Very few. Like, I used to work for a brief time in Boston, and the only time people knew in the US where Hull was, or the team, was when we were because we were in the Premier League for like a year,
Yep.
but like we've just gone way down. So not a lot of people know Hull City, but yeah, you're a West Ham fan. So tell me about that. Like, how did that happen? Tell me, when did soccer come into your life?
I will admit this. I'm not ashamed of this. I should be probably, but I'm not. I came into not the sport. I mean, the sports existed, here, of course, but it's not,
Mm.
or at least wasn't up until nowadays. I would say it's pretty popular, with MLS and the amount of clubs and the crowds that they draw. And then you see the responses and to, international games or friendlies or whatnot. The national team has a pretty massive following. So it's popular nowadays, but growing up, I wouldn't have really known much about the culture of the sport, especially around the world, which that's our little American bubble we get to live in sometimes. So
Yeah.
the thing that actually exposed me more to global soccer, global football there was actually supporters culture and kind of coming across, the infamous, hooligan histories in the 70s and 80s, especially. And who was really at the prime central of a lot of those stories would be West Ham fans. And so between books, documentaries, Among the Thugs was a really, really good one I enjoyed. I can't remember the author's name on that one. There's been a few others, but West Ham had that notoriety there, the rivalry with Millwall, and then you sort of get to learn more about Birmingham or Chelsea and, these different groups. And so I couldn't help but be a bit enamored by that. It's on the same principle of why I like mafia films and stories and books and, that darker side of kind of things was always just interesting. And so football hooliganism was up there. It was gangland warfare for a lot. So I was like, and ironically through that, and I don't know if it was just the unique colors. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Sorry.
And the part that's not, that I don't have too much shame in admitting is the glorious film, Green Street Hooligan with Elijah Wood. That I had, I went into that. I don't know. I think I had maybe it was somebody I worked with had brought it into the tattoo shop. This would have been early in my career, if not apprenticing or whatnot. Maybe it was my first year, but
Right.
I just started into tattooing. And somebody brought the film in, and I know now it's just the storyline wise and premise of it's obviously very silly in Hollywood, but I didn't care. It was seeing the claret and blue colors together and whatnot, and just the diehard support. And as everyone, locally, the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team is, the second winningest team in baseball history behind the Yankees. It's not that we're trying to cry that we're a small team, but again, I grew up, after the winning ways in the early 80s, the team was pretty terrible. So it's any team, any fan, to be a diehard supporter of a club or a team or what have you that is terrible or at best mediocre is hard. And so when I started learning about the world of football and the fandom, if you ran into anyone stateside, they were a Manchester United fan. Later years, a bit more of the Chelsea. Now everyone's a Manchester City fan. Isn't that weird? So,
yeah, it's weird.
Everyone was the popular teams, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas. You got all your big clubs. Liverpool, of course. So for me, it was also like, who's West Ham? Who's this? And they have this really cool stadium. It looks like a castle. I thought so. Yeah, that was it. That was my initial appeal, and I've just been there ever since.
You've stuck with it. Yeah, I was gonna ask you. So it's not like you want to be a football hooligan. You're just kind of enamored with the culture of it. That's right?
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's easy, especially here, that it gets kind of glorified, romanticized.
Right.
And you even seen that, unfortunately, with MLS clubs and these little groups of kids, and you want to start, let's go out and act like whatever. It's like, the next town is not down the tube. We're not going to, guys, this is 4 hours away. You're not going to travel and start fights. Just stop. It's just, it was about, sort of understanding that culture of it, but gleaming from it what positives you could from a supporter standpoint, but also disregarding all the silliness, because we don't need to do all that. But there are people who do that, unfortunately. But by and large, no, it was just about the that, really diehard sort of supporters group, and then being able to stand there and being the group that sits in the stands and sings and chants, try to do it for the solid 2 hours. And, yeah, it's it's like, oh, Americans are trying to cut. Yeah, we are. It's awesome. It's fun, and we'd love to see more of that here. So
Yeah, absolutely. I always had a brief time in college in New Hampshire, and I always admired, and then obviously got to do some stuff in Boston, and then I always admired the fandom around baseball, particularly and I always wondered if that would translate into soccer in late, and this is like years ago.
yeah,
I always wondered if it would translate into soccer, and it feels like it's starting to now. That sort of
oh yeah,
fandom
I'd say so.
culture. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's good to see because I
Yep.
know, and also I know a lot of our old players are now enjoying very. They've maybe played in for West Ham and these in these miserable climates, and
Yeah.
now they're in LA playing for
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
a lot of our a lot of our footballers are now over there enjoying the sun and the heat. So I'm all for that. So yeah, I could talk to you for hours about soccer, Kyle, but I do want to touch on some of the wrestling stuff. Now, I think a lot of people discovered you through your work in wrestling across the board. You've done work with NWA, merchandise designs as well as AEW, but a lot of people also know you for your work with Bray Wyatt
Hmm.
in WWE. Now, what I really love the story of how you reached out to Bray because it was you shooting your shot.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that was really fantastic because actually, if you're respectful and you have a reason to shoot that shot, like I'm not saying that everybody should start bombarding their favorite creatives with DMs and things, but actually, I thought that was fantastic that that happened for you when you shot the shot and Bray came back to you and came back to you with those ideas. What did you think about it? What did you think when all these? Because I remember you said in your interview with the Insiders and of course Jody, who I miss and love as well. Big fan of Jody and the Insiders and that whole culture around Bray.
Yep.
What did you think when that stuff? Because you were with your family and you get messages all the time and all this stuff. So what was that like for you to be bombarded with that stuff and kind of be involved in that creative process to a point?
Well, it was a learning curve initially when he first did it. Um, I've told the story before and
Mm.
kind of touch on it. We started the conversation, we back and forth about an initial tattoo idea, and then long story short, they all kind of fell through. But he still sent me to the show, and I got to meet him. And then it was just kind of touch and go, and you'd kind of, I don't know. Then there are times when you think maybe nothing's gonna happen, but it was just a normal evening sitting on the couch with my wife and my oldest daughter at the time sitting there, and the phone just started blowing up. And it's that was my first introduction into how a little bit of his mind works. It's pretty. There was no heads up. It was just my phone just started going off, and it was just pictures, images, uh, props, art, movie stills. You could kind of draw the dots to some of them. Some of them you thought, is he pocket dialing me? Like I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Um, and then in the middle of all that is you might get some texts and, hey, I'm gonna follow, hold on a second, I gotta send you some more stuff first and I'll explain it later. And then he calls you and then there's more texts. And it is it's trying to wrangle a tornado a little bit. And
Yeah.
I think you've heard that probably echoed, and a lot of people who've knew him well or worked with him can say something akin to that at various levels to it. So it's intimidating. To answer the question, it's intimidating. I put a lot of pressure on myself,
Mm.
a lot of pressure on myself to want to be. You want to be right out of the gate every time. Everything you produce for someone, every request you get, you hope that you're doing exactly what they want, and you're just going to blow them away and more than what they want. You want to give them
Mm.
something that they didn't even expect on top of that. And call that just a simple goal, but with him, with Wyndham's ideas, on one hand, it was extremely easy to put together his ideas because he was so descriptive and you had so much that you could work with. On the other, you almost had too much. And some
Yeah.
things he'd want to kind of dial it in, some things he wouldn't, some things he would put out there, and I would take it too much on the nose as, hey, you really like this? And he'll come back later and go, that just kind of, I don't know why I put that in there. Or I like this one little thing maybe associated with that as an idea. So, sometimes trying to bring all of his thoughts together was hard, but it's exciting. It's adrenaline driven. I mean, um, the
Yeah.
creative space for that and where you can go with it. It was overwhelming. Some people give you something to kind of start and you can go down a path and you can be creative with it. It kind of forces you to almost have that on fire brainwave like he did. And but man, I think I wish people could. You're seeing a fraction of what the stuff he would talk about and say. And again, I can't be the only one who recognizes that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this as well is because I speak to a lot of young people that want to be tattooists, they want to be artists, want to
Mhm.
work for big companies as you've been able to do. And I think there was something that really struck me when you were talking about, you were talking to the insiders about getting his ideas on paper. He used to say, go all the way with it to you,
Mhm.
and then you would have to take his vision. Now, I know because I've been that frustrating customer to a tattooist when I go, mate, just you do what you want to do. You do what you want to do. And I kind of have, I'm like, yeah, I trust the artist, but actually it can help to really fine tune it and really have a really good idea when you go in to a tattoo shop or you want to get something done. So when you talk about the challenges of working with Bray, and this was touched on in the documentary, and I mean this, this question with no disrespect to, of course, his very creative mind, but what were the challenges of working with that? Because again, like you said in the interview, you're working to very tight deadlines. Sometimes you would hear from him in short bursts and then not hear from him. So, and this question is sort of by design for as a sort of a piece of advice for any freelancers, for any people that want to get into that industry. What were the challenges of working with an artist like Windham, and making sure, again, trying to rein him in effectively, because I'm sure that's something that
Yeah.
may happen with a lot of creative artists at all levels.
Wyndham, well, for one, Wyndham is a creative. So I think the answer to that is when you are working with the public at large, let's say, and somebody wants to commission you for something, and it's not to imply that other people aren't creative. What I mean to say is you're not predominantly in that headspace. So someone has an idea, let's say as a tattoo artist, and more often than not, I take their idea. They're not particularly established ideas yet. They don't quite have full voice to what they want it to be. Well, you as the creative takes that, they give you the trust, and they're kind of speaking to that when you tell the artist, like, well, I trust you with it. And I said, I'm all for creative freedom, but give me a nudge in a certain direction.
Right.
That's most people. Wyndham is already there. He's got, I could never be more creative than Wyndham. There was just certain little components to his thought process that my job almost became more of trying to wrangle in those thoughts, trying to put together the code, trying to go, okay, he said all these things. You're trying to make one thing. He gave you 57 different direct points to work off of.
Right.
And it's not that he's going like difficult customers could be, where they go, well, I want this design. I want it to be exactly like this with this exactly right here. He's not doing that. He's giving, it's almost like a test. He's giving you all these things that inspire him, which he's hoping that they then inspire you. And well, different things inspire different people different ways. So that's what I mean when I speak to, I could take it and derive from it something else, and I'll present it back to him, and he would say, oh, well, he never really told me, he's never said, no, he didn't like anything. It was never even that. He loves seeing the brainstorming process. So, with him, kind of lost my train of thought. Something else I was going to remind me of, and it might come to me.
It's okay.
But his approach was, he didn't quite have it fine tuned. He wanted to see so much come to life, and so I think for him it was also hard to take all these ideas and make be one thing. I would say, if you could identify my job clearly, it's almost like I never really worked for the WWE. I've done very little actual direct sales of, here's my art, they purchased it, so forth. That has happened probably less than people realize. What people don't realize is the majority of that I would produce or illustrate, and most folks don't know what was done for fun, what was done sometimes is my idea with him to say, hey, what about, I had this kind of thought or look, and he could really like it. He'd want to implement it and speak to how he would want to do something with it for the character. a piece of artwork I made. Or he would reach out to me. These deadlines that you speak of would be as a result of the company. This is from him. As a result of constantly, he got a guy with all this creativity. He made this thing. He did it almost, and the way I always understood it, by the way he spoke of it, was that the initial Fiend stuff and the Funhouse and all that. I don't know if anyone's kind of revising history a bit, but to hear him say it to me this was early days. AEW had just started, and I remember he had kind of a tongue-in-cheek comment. He goes, they're not really in a position to say no to ideas right now. They were at that time.
Okay.
Talent was either leaving or talent was leveraging whatnot and what have you. This as businesses go, which I think is beneficial to the wrestling business to have those options because it forces people to be creative and utilize talent. So he felt, I think he had the opportunity to get the idea heard, if only because what else are they going to do? And he almost seemed to kind of, I'm sure nobody's going to support an idea and fill up and do all this and that. But I really feel like the early days of the Funhouse stuff and a lot of that buildup was really him doing it. I don't think, and someone else could come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't get the sense by the way he spoke of it that it was a company-backed thing. It was almost like he's going to go out of his way. He's going to reach out to people, and that's where I became one of the lucky ones, to say, hey, I have this idea. Let's try to bring it to life. And then you had these, people bringing it to life. And when it became a success, when they tried it out, okay, we'll give it a shot. This is kind of how he would speak to it. Like, I'll just appease him. And he did have that kind of relationship with Vince. It's been touched on. He kind of spoke to it a bit. There was a little bit of that, Vince was protective of it. There was and I think he would kind of go to him, and he was able to speak his mind. Other performers that I've spoken to have echoed that I spoke, and I won't say names, but I did speak with one performer who was in a situation with his bookings and just his career, where he was at. And I remember him saying he wanted to reach out to Windham to get his advice on what to do, because Windham had been so famously, he wouldn't cower. He wouldn't be afraid to speak his mind. He wouldn't be afraid to speak to Vince that way. He wouldn't be, if he did or didn't like something or had to push back, he would. He wasn't a yes man in that way. So I think he had that reputation, and he did it with decency and kindness from what I gathered. So you could never say, Bray was, the Windham was never being a hard to work with or any kind of a bully. He was just honest about himself, and he was a straight shooter basically. So that came with other people wanting to reach out to him for that. So I think, they did the Funhouse, they tried it out. When it became a success and started to really pick up, then the battles became the writers, the people in control of go, hey, well, let's do this. And we spent a lot of those conversations where he would vent about the frustrations of that process, being handcuffed a bit, being told, let's do. He was not a fan of when Seth Rollins showed up on the Funhouse in that one skit all those years ago. As he said, he would have to try to then get back online and spin their narrative back to what he could control, because they didn't, he's got this idea. Instead of bothering to understand his idea, they wanted to kind of change it up. And I think even that documentary spoke to it, or someone said that, where he had some ideas, but it was hard. It was hard to kind of wrangle in. Maybe it was Triple H had said it, but it was hard at times to take all of his ideas and kind of get him to scale it back a little bit. And earlier when you said, really run with it when it comes to designs, so he'd come at me and say, well, I got one version of the Fiend, and I want it to have one hand is like got these giant, long, crazy spike fingers, and maybe something comes off the back of the wrist and spikes come out of that, almost like Scarecrow's gauntlet in Arkham, and you're like, what in God, you're going to wrestle in this? Yeah. And I said, how is it? He goes, don't worry about it. That's not for us to worry about. That's for them to worry about.
Yeah.
I go, how big do you want? You want these? I go, you want it to be like that? Like, you're going to come to the ring with massive spikes on your hands? He goes, just go with it. Make it as big and as nasty and as gnarly. And, don't try to design something for wrestling. Don't worry about trying to make it work. You just design. I want to, so he liked just pushing whatever envelope he could and trying different things out. And sometimes that would, worked out. Sometimes it backfired, but yeah, that's the wild storm of his thought process.
Yeah, and I think that is spoken about in the documentary, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But from your standpoint, again, if you were speaking to somebody else who maybe is a fan of your work or a fan of what came to be on television from your ideas. What did you kind of learn about? Because I know you saying you never directly worked for WWE, but you were working with Bray, talking to Bray right up until his last return. You would come with the sketches, and then it would go to Jason, right? He would then put it, put it together. So getting stuff from your point of view, I assume it was very much more stressful in some ways for Bray and other parties. But from your point of view, what did you learn about the industry in terms of getting your ideas from your brain and Windham's brain to then getting them on TV, and some of the frustrations? I imagine it's a little similar, and I know you've spoken on this on social media, to when you're a freelancer, you give somebody an idea and then they take it and then it becomes something completely different. Did you find that, and was that frustrating to you at all?
I think out of the gate, I was a little less involved with some of that. Again, my initial involvement in that, and for reasons that I'll never know, but so he started the process and he had this idea for the character. The puppets were already being produced, as I understand the timeline of things. But for reasons that, again, I can only go off of Bray's calls and texts, he says, no one can seem to illustrate this. His verbal description of it was not getting approved by the powers that be. Vince, I suppose, I really couldn't say. And his words were, other people that have tried to illustrate this concept, it wasn't selling. It just wasn't working for some reason. And I remember it was almost too easy initially, because I said, you like the Joker from the Endgame run with the cut off face. He goes, and he liked the aesthetics of that. Now at the time he wasn't very clear on that. So that's quite literally that initial sketch is like, all right, here's the Joker face with Lobo. You wanted them scarred into the head. I thought he was going to be skin pulled across there, but he just wanted to be all one, just big stretched face. But anyway, so he had his ideas. I sketched it out. That was whatever he was looking for. I was able to give him. That's all I can say to that. I don't know why. I don't know how he landed on me. It was just that chance meeting thing, like you said earlier. Shoot the shot, and I was in the back of his mind. I don't know. But he did. He reached out to me, and that's my process in that. So then when the product actually got made, any feedback to that creative process, that would have come down on, I guess, Jason's shoulders making it, and whatever, the kickback of if people didn't like it or had an issue. But after that, there was just, I really got involved speaking to that direct relationship with him, because the corporate creative side would come in and say, we're going to do X, Y, Z. And he would go, oh, he hated it. And he would say no. So he would task me to design something else. He always wanted to have a counter offer. If they came at him sideways with stuff, he would say, no, I don't like that. I want to do this. He was very upset at the time about the idea of bringing the Funhouse to life. I believe the company or somebody wanted to have an entire stable of people dressed up as the puppets, and he was not into it.
Right.
So the counter that he made, and I spoke to this already, but that's why that Huskus, almost leather face with a big giant metal spikes piece made it out there. That was something that he requested, because his counter offer was, well, I will play the characters. You keep it in that headspace of the Funhouse. It's not a real physical place. And if I have to come out or the characters come out, I will play, because it's all in my head. So I will be these characters come to life. That helps keep it in the mythos that I've created. Not, I've got 5 friends with me. That doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't be there physically. So that's what it was a few years ago. Right. And that was one of those. So, you draw something, you'd send it, and then it would happen, not happen. Usually it didn't happen. It's like, hey, he's commissioning it. But I don't know if he would go, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And eventually he pushed back enough, they would drop it. I could not tell you.
Right.
But then even after he, they released him, which was really bizarre at that stretch where they were getting rid of a lot of talent. And when he came back, I don't know if it was always the corporate, let's call it, side of things, that they wanted things to be their way. And I imagine it would. You got a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company. They're going to want to try to fine-tune all those money-making opportunities. And that was another thing too. It wasn't a character the merchandising side of things and whatnot. I'm sure it's kind of like Star Wars. You're going to want to maximize your profits when you can. And pro wrestling is no different. You're kidding yourself if you think it isn't. So, but where he was at was, not, doesn't quite fit that mold as easily. So he would say, hey, I want this. And then I would, commission me further and I would design something. And that's what we did. And that was going on pretty hot and heavy there right up before the return. But in, famous Windham fashion, something else that's said by numerous others that knew him well was he might just disappear on you. And he said it himself. He's like, hey, you can ask my best friends, man. Sometimes I just kind of fall off face of the plane a little bit. And he'll just kind of just go dark for a while, and you don't hear from him and whatnot. And unfortunately, that was even how it was right up towards the end there. And I was even fielding messages from people who I would think would know him better than I would, and yet other performers and entertainers, have you heard from him, would ask me that, and I said no. So right. It could be like that. The conversations would go in and out, and so I would have parts of information, and I think that I was there as a buffer. He did the same with the burnt Fiend look. I spoke to that in the past already, but I had 2 hours, if that, to try to design an entire thing because it had to be done before 10 o'clock and before Vince left the building. And I said, okay, so, hurry to get that done. But then, unfortunately, there was a little weird drop in communication and some other shenanigans that I won't get into with some other people that was a little bit, unfortunately, very childish and kind of soured me a little bit. But they went their direction, but I didn't know for sure up even until because it was Windham that sent me the picture of him in the full gear when it was all done, that first pose studio shot where he's dressed in all he sent me that, and I remember going, cool. That doesn't look like the one that, so, I didn't even know then. So it was, you'd be quiet, and all of a sudden here comes Windham, and he's got all these ideas. And a lot of that, what I was saying about wasn't straight for the company. The initial design had to be signed through the company. We had to sign freelancer contracts with that. And then once they own the rights to it, they can do whatever they want with it. And then it's showing up on a shirt and all that, I had nothing to do with that. Right. They can change and alter the artwork, which is another thing that the company does a lot. So that can be frustrating, but so that's basically it with that.
Yeah. Okay. Did it, I've got a few more questions for you, Kyle, because I'm really enjoying this chat, and thank you so much for making the time. Did it, I have to ask, did it sour? Because you were a fan, right? You've been watching ECW, I believe. You had a Taz shirt, was your first ECW. You've been watching wrestling for a long time. Did working in the industry sour your view of it at all? Are you still a fan in the same way that you were when you were a kid?
I mean, I think it's it does to a point. It can be a bit of a grind. It's hard whenever, golly, it's sometimes when I speak, let's specifically with Windham and whatnot, I have been very clear repeatedly, and I'll say it here for the sake of this conversation. In the grand scheme of him and the creative processes and the backstage and knowledge and knowing what's going on, Twitter or X, whatever, especially, has made it far worse. I think too many folks think that I probably had more involvement than I did, and I'm very, very grateful that Windham would constantly want to refer to me as one of his guys. In his mind at the time, it was, and I said this before, him, you had Jason who was doing the sculpts, and then whatever else he did. And then he had one or two other names in there, and I used to, off the top of my head, I can't remember the gentleman's names. Okay. But they were people that within the company that he worked with, or so while I'm grateful for that, I've made it very clear that, if the career of Windham and his creations is a wheel, I'm but one spoke on that wheel, one of many. And so I do not try, and hopefully don't oversell my value or worth in that situation. But where it was interesting for me is that, I came on board because to get that wheel going, because it was at a standstill, it was being built, but there was nothing to kickstart it. And he needed this drawing. He landed on me, and that was my role in it. So I got to be maybe as far as getting that moving, I got to be that first little spoke on that wheel, and that was pretty amazing. And I could have done that, been done with that, and said, hey, that was really fun. As a lifelong fan of wrestling, it's cool as hell. You know, my buddies I grew up with, you know, all around the St. Louis, so we don't live next to each other these days, but even childhood friends, they still watch wrestling. They'll still go to the shows. And, you know, they've said to me, like, man, can you imagine thinking back then that you would do something like that? I could have done that, been perfectly content and happy with it. Great experience, but, you know, it did blow up and become a little bit bigger, and I got to do, you know, other things. And when you start to have experiences that are difficult, or relationships that become difficult, you know, you do sort of have that don't meet your heroes kind of reaction to some things. And before, not to try to read in any of that kind of stuff. I mean, by and large, most of the talent I've worked with have been fantastic, and some haven't. I have it, you know, I'm not a air out the dirty laundry kind of thing person, but you know, I have, you know, spoken to it a little bit if need be, but it is what it is. You know, they're real people. Real people are flawed. This is a business. It's a performance. So as a fan, when you just get to be on that one side of that aisle and see it for the production that it is, you know, I would imagine it's equivalent if you start working on film or television and you're backstage and you run into, you know, you're excited, you know who these people are, you know, as I do. I know them as these characters or these personas. And to meet some of them and you find out they're nothing like their persona, they're even better. Oh, they're fantastic, good people. And I've met those and absolutely worked with those. And then you meet the others that you go, ooh, you're not, kind of wish I would have stayed just a fan. Right. You know, and that can happen. And then when you sort of see how, you know, how things get made, and you sort of break down that illusion a bit, or, you know, so all those things can come into play. So I think there's this, you know, overall, no. I mean, pro wrestling is a blast. It always will be. It's so uniquely itself. It's going to have ups and downs. We're going to see big lulls again. We'll see big highs again. And, you know, there's something for everyone with the whole market of it, whatnot. But some days it would be easier to consume the product if I could just still be a fan. But, you know, all that being said, don't get me wrong. I still enjoy it. I might have my lulls and my interests sometimes as well, but yeah, I'm still absolutely a fan. I always will be, you know, even family too. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your honesty. And that, you know, three more questions on the wrestling stuff. And then I'd like to do some around your future and what you've got coming up. What did you think of the documentary? I think a lot of people, you know, I saw some stuff on social media. I think a lot of people would have liked you to be featured in that. And I'm not trying to. We can keep, you know, we can take this out. You know, it's just while I've got you. A lot of people would have liked to see you in there. But again, as you say, some people have a different idea of how you were involved. What did you think of the documentary and how it was pulled together?
Well, first and foremost, I have not seen all the documentary, if I could be completely honest.
Okay.
As I said, back to the wheel analogy, all that. By no means does that documentary, does the company, does anybody, do I feel that by not being, you know, I you know, some very kind people would say, well, you should have been interviewed as well. I don't know about all that. I don't know if I think to have zero mention in that narrative is what that hurt. It hurt because when it's presented to me by Windham and the words, and again, I'm you know, I'm not going to repeat even things that he said, but Windham was frustrated. Windham expressed frustration and had his opinions because what he wanted to be illustrated, people weren't doing right. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what the drawings were. I don't know why they weren't working. I don't know if it was, you know, there are people who can, let's say, sculpt something and they see that, whether it be anything they're sculpting, and they can see the image in it, and that artist can pull. I can't do that. I have no idea how to do that. But even though they can do that on that sculpt, okay, well, I want you to draw what you see in your head. They can't draw that. So I imagine it really was as simple as that. Whether it was Jason, whether it was someone else in the design process, people that go, oh, I know what you're saying. I can, but they can't quite put it on paper. And because it's the paper that has to sell it to the people to get the approval. That's where I came in. So that's my one little lucked out. That's my spot in that. And luckily, I was also used for creativity in other ways. But the initial thing that got me in the door it was Bray's idea. It was 100% the Bray Wyatt, this is my Fiend character concept. So it was his creation. Someone else had to sculpt it, make it work. I was like a middleman in that scenario. So do I need to have an interview on a documentary? No, I don't. I think the part that stung was watching the history start to play out. I'm watching along. And at first, you definitely just kind of caught up in the moments of it, of him not being there anymore and whatnot. And just, it's still shocking. Sometimes I still kind of go, oh yeah, it was wild. But to watch that and then have the narrative play out of, here's still got all the old sketches here. And it's sort of the way the documentary gives us a presentation of, yep, here's Windham's idea and here's the person that created it. That was it. And I thought, that's just factually not accurate. That's just not entirely true. And to, not have at least your name referenced. If you're going to show a bunch of whatever artwork that was never used because it wasn't approved, but you won't even toss mine on the screen, it's not clout chasing stuff. It's not about it. Who's going to know? Nobody's going to know that it was mine, but it was an acknowledgement of that. But it wasn't done. Why, I have no idea. And like I said, it's that was just the first. So I think once we kind of got past that and I realized where it was going, I said, that's fine. I go, because, you don't want to complain. If you start complaining, you're coming off like you're owed something and you make a fool of yourself. And it's like, I'm not. There's no, I don't expect or have not. If anything, I'll be the first to say I have gotten far more than I ever deserved from that. You talked about Jody and all that kind of stuff. The amount of people like her and the fans, and Windham fans definitely were unique in their own, because it requires a certain diehard devotion to that. They were special. And to have them be so supportive and have, I could start rattling off all the names, people that I had, say what you will about them, but I had enjoyed a little back and forth with Eric Bischoff, of all people. Well, I grew up in the late 90s with all my buddies in high school watching wrestling and doing wrestling. I got that guy who's on that television show that I used to watch telling me that I should be proud of myself. These are very kind things. Those are the things I'll remember most of all. There's no sour grape crap. It's just, but to have to answer the question, yeah, it was a bummer. It would have been nice just to be acknowledged, because for any creatives that might be watching this is an ego talking. If you're creative, especially if you try to make a job out of this, and you see it online, stolen artwork, the AI debacle going on right now, everything else, artists deserve credit. That's not entitlement. That's not boo-hooing. That's not expecting to be treated like this. No. It costs you nothing. It is human decency to acknowledge it. The fact that Bill Finger had to fight, or his family had to fight for all those years to be acknowledged in the same creative space with Bob Kane and the invention of Batman. When you got a guy like Bob Kane who goes, well, I got this idea for Batman. He makes a terrible drawing of it. Another guy comes in named Bill Finger who designs the Batman we know and love now, a whole host of other side characters and whatnot. He puts together, call it 80% of the Batman world. But for all those years up until, I can't remember how many, within the last 10 maybe, you wouldn't even know that guy existed.
Right.
You didn't give that creator his due. You certainly didn't give him his flowers, and you damn sure didn't pay him for it. So giving people acknowledgement, that respect, that's a lot. And a creative and an artist will really kind of stick by you if you're showing that you care enough. So I've been in great situations where I've been supported that way and not so great. So that was why. And I think any creative can certainly understand that. It's not about anything else. It's just about, just not having that acknowledgement was a bummer.
Yeah. That's why I asked the question. It wasn't about, picking at certain things. It's just that, again, the most of our, a lot of our audience are young people, young creatives. And that's why I wanted to ask, because again, that, these are debates that people are having now with AI and it's been around for years. with photography credits, for example. Again,
Yeah.
people should get credit, but they don't all the time. And I think that's a reality that is worth discussing.
Well, you talk about the books behind me. This is my wife's little library space we have, and she's someone we talk about a lot. She'll come and say the amount of book people that AI is writing the books, the publishing debacles of it. AI is just pumping out junk covers to these things. A rather talented comic book artist just got busted and called out for using AI to draw, and it's depressing. And I will say, it's also real easy. You got to understand, business is just business. You can't get emotional about things. So, but if I can defend my emotional connection to this, it is because I got to know him, and if we had a conversation on the phone for an hour and a half, the majority of that would be about whatever. Who knows what? We've talked about personal interests, family matters. Just whatever, right? As you do, you're talking to someone, and he's a very chatty person, and I can certainly be long-winded if the subject matter calls for it. So we could just talk like two old hens on the phone, and you get to know someone. So I do have an emotional connection to Windham beyond just a client. Yeah. I found him to be a great person. We spent hours together in my studio, hours with JoJo and their firstborn Nash as a baby. Him meeting my family and my children and saying, and I remember he introduced himself as Windham, and I almost said, "Hey, this is Bray Wyatt," because and he was a gentleman, and he was just a sweet guy. And so I was honored to be a part of that life. So yeah, I'm going to carry a little bit of emotional weight to that.
Good.
It is.
No, good. And it should be respected. And I think that, again, as a lesson for people consuming this, I think that there are some realities there, but I think that passion and that emotional connection is what stands true. Again, something I want to ask for you as a wrestling fan, what do you think? Because you touched on it a little bit earlier, the ideas and the vision. Are you watching the current product? Do you see what Taylor's doing? And have you kind of heard of that, seen it? What do you think about it as an artist and a creative, if nothing else, as a fan?
I'm seeing wrestling for quite a few months now. Like I went ahead and ordered the AEW show last night just because. I mean, I could not know what's going on with AEW television and not watch it, but that come pay-per-view time, you're probably going to see some really quality wrestling. And I like how that's weirdly an argument right now, that somehow that's bad to have whatever. So both the WWE, AEW, anything else, I have not sat and watched. It's airing when I'm either working or I'm coming home to get whatever family time I can with my kids, or my youngest, especially in the evening time. That's usually when I'll go to the gym and take that time for myself. So by the time I'm home, and then I'm fortunate to be very busy with a lot of work with Monty Cook Games, currently doing some work with Magnus Archives, Rusty Quill out of the UK. So I've had a lot of illustrations, and I'm just anal retentive details. So I want to make sure that it looked like it was stuff based in the UK. So I harassed my old Black Mass clothing friend for his ideas. And anyway, so by the time I get a chance to sit and do anything or have any real free time, it's not much in the way of turning on the show. So my wrestling consumption comes in the form of social media. You get online, YouTube clips, Instagram, whatever. So you get all the highlights. Yeah. So I'm paying attention, or I'll have somebody go, "Hey," and that's what happened with the Wyatt 6 stuff. Was somebody hit me up and said, "Hey, did you catch the program? Did you catch the debut stuff?" And I had known about the hint things, but I get bits and pieces, so I wasn't sure what they were doing. I know they're back to doing the QR stuff and all that, and but I have completely no connection to any of that, or anyone who did. So I was just watching like anyone else. So if you're asking what do I think about it, I think that's just been sort of the pickle of it. For starters, I was very happy that they did something to benefit his wife and kids, like with merchandise and whatnot. Yeah. And it's been weird ever since I started working with Malakai and AEW. I think there was some bitterness. I don't care. I'm more than happy to get into my suspicions on that, but I have not heard anything from the company whatsoever. So I had reached out and just said I would really like to do something for no money, no recognition. Don't have to put my name on anything. I'm not looking for any of that. I was like, I just wanted to do something that you could hopefully sell, benefit his kids. You want prints, you want a shirt? I don't know. I wanted to do something. I wanted to give back. And just nothing was responded to. Spoke with one other with Rob, you know, a little bit, but you know, that's not his department of things. So I don't really know what the creative side was with any of that. I wish I could have helped him on that. But so when they started doing the characters and stuff, and they finally debuted it, as I already kind of said, you get burdened by information a little bit. I would love to know what it would be like to watch that as a fan, because I love the theatrics. Some people hate it. You know, it's cheesy. I don't care. When you grow up as a kid in the 80s watching that wrestling and through the early 90s, and then you grow up with the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era is hitting as I'm hitting that late teens stage. So I felt like wrestling grew with me in that same way. I sort of got to be at a perfect age for all of it. So with that being said, nostalgia is a hell of a thing. So you can go back and go, God, that wrestling was terrible. But it's like, but we have reverence now for the ridiculous characters. And we have reverence for the over-the-top stuff and the theatrics and whatnot. And some things are better than others for sure. And that's why Undertaker survived like he did, because no matter how, we know he's not dead, but you don't care. It's beautiful to watch. It's cinematic.
Yeah.
So as a fan, I would love to know how I would have reacted to seeing the Wyatt Six stuff. And visually what they did, the production of it, I got to catch, like I said, the video of they destroyed all the backstage whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing the best they can with it. I think it has a certain that analog kind of horror quality to it a little bit, which I am a bit of a sucker for. I'm a huge fan of that stuff too. So yeah, I think it's fairly cool overall. I don't know if I'm missing anything. I don't, but when it comes to the masks, it comes to the characters and masks. And like I said, get mad at me for saying it, but I know that you didn't like it. So it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Not saying that. I just, I believe, because I think Rob is really smart, and I'm sure that the last thing anybody's going to want to do is disrespect his legacy. And I hope that first and foremost, as long as it's not just one of those, let's just pump out this stuff and is this really helping people? And from a wrestling standpoint, from characters, you got to, because as a pro wrestler, if your character gets kind of changed up a lot and they kind of write you in a weird spot, no matter how talented you are, it's hard to come back from that, So you got all these characters in that, speaking specifically to, Dexter Loomis, who's super kind guy, like him a lot, always liked the character. Joe, and I'm not super familiar with the NXT stuff, but now that you're sort of saddled with this, you are now one of those puppets. It's like, where's your dimensions as a character? So I think about that. I hope that it all works out for everyone involved. I just hope that it does accelerate people's careers and whatnot. I know that I'm sure people will probably really enjoy doing it because they really enjoyed Windham and whatnot. And I hope as fans, everyone gets to keep enjoying it. For him, his legacy, I want it to work, because for as amazing as all of his character stuff was, man, it's just like there's a history of leave it alone. Let the creative, that's an example of, I understand you got to wrangle in some of the ideas, but I feel like they could have done more if Windham would have had a little bit less reins on him too. I liked it. Maybe it wasn't for television. Maybe it's not for pro wrestling, but if anything, that guy should have written screenplays or movies or something.
But that was my next question before we start the roundup. I got about 4 more for you, Kyle, and thank you again for giving me so much of your time today. Is there anything you would have loved to have done? People can see the sketches. You nearly did masks for Alexa Bliss and all that stuff. But if you had something like a movie or a script or something, what would you like to have done with Windham? If there was anything that you would have liked to have tried to work on him with, maybe a film or something like that, what would you have loved to have done?
I think that that's a good one. I always have a very similar conversation with Malakai. If I understand anything about Windham, is I understand the thought process going a bit beyond. It's almost like you have a creative space. You have this idea that better befits, the world of comics and film or whatnot, or books. Not, because pro wrestling it's part of that. You get that, but there's also the athleticism behind it. You have to ultimately, no matter what you do on all the other TV and the characters, you go into a 20x20 and you fight, right? So whatever it is you do has to make sense eventually when it gets to that point. If not, it starts to get a little hokey. So you are kind of wrangled in. So anyway, to me, obviously, I connected with specifically the Fiend stuff. I loved all the Wyatt family stuff initially. But even that, felt like you could expand on that, and you can see a universe for that outside of the world of pro wrestling. It can be something else, some other medium that it could perform in. And with the Fiend stuff, especially, that just became, and that's why there was so much artwork that I would pump out there. And a lot of times fans would assume it meant something. I'm like, oh, I thought it was cool. Because that became definitely like a muse for myself. I felt connected to it because it was his description. He wanted, Joker face with Lobo eyes. We can dumb it down to that and say that was the gist of it. And he spoke to having this almost piratey kind of coat that he was going to wear. And I remember when he described it, I was like, what are you wearing? And so it was kind of funny. But he knew what it meant to him and whatnot. And, so you see that. So for me, it was just like the face, the distinctive, the teeth, the smile, the eyes, the yellow. I mean, those are Sith eyes. And, the black and red color scheme and, all that. So it became such a muse that I would just illustrate it. And I felt like I could put the Fiend anywhere. I could put that thing on anything. I could make it and I still do that. So to the point where not using certain names or copywritten things, there's so much I want to do that for me as a creative, it still keeps me, man, what can I do with that? What comic book, some kind of a strip, maybe something to do with, call it in the world of fan fiction, call it, we know it as Legends now, but the world of Star Wars, where people come along and you make I've never been a fan fiction guy, but I will be for this. And similarly with Malakai, the House of Black, because for him, the masks mean something. The way his face is painted means something. When he does and doesn't wear the red eye contact means something.
Yeah.
Everything he does is extremely thought out. Every little promo, everything he says, it's a much bigger than what you get on TV kind of thing. And then unfortunately too, if you're not keeping the stuff consistent and whatnot, just like with Windham, you go and you got this creative idea, but they're derailing it. You're like, oh my goodness. So you got to try to kind of make something out of that and keep it going again. And they come in with something else that's silly and you're like, oh my goodness. So you got to keep fighting so that's the creative, that's their problem. But but you see the world that they build. Yeah. And you think these skulls, these masks, who Malakai Black is, I don't know how much fans really understand the character at all. He hadn't had a chance to really expand on it. He's not really being, I'm not going to say, the character is haunted, but there is a idea of godlike, it's this cult. And here's the thing. I barely know. He won't tell me. I said, you need to put all these ideas, talking to, with Malakai, like put all this stuff down, in a book, sort of like you have this chance to flesh out your little Tolkien-esque world here. You can go in and you have all these characters. All those masks mean something. All the way they're designed is based on something. The one thing that I wish we would have done, and it didn't not happen for any other particular reason. And I think it was a lot going on. The clothing line was going, everything else. This is a few years ago, but it was really based around that the first mask that he's ever worn with the antlers coming off, with the infamous one, his first AEW debut mask. Yeah, which I started working with, designing promo stuff with him when he was still with the WWE. Is actually right around the time he gets let go, and I remember just being like, I saw it online, and I texted him like, "Is this true?" And because he's stunned, and it was it's kind of bizarre, but he got to, because we had some cool stuff. He asked me to do with that. That was actually the closest thing that we're kind of talking about, like what would you do beyond wrestling? He wanted to use me to go, hey, I have this character and I want you to help me flesh it out. So he was going to start being strategic with socials, and he was going to post on socials with all black squares, and then an image would pop up, and kind of use, especially on the indies at this point, before the AEW came in, as people we want to use, he's going to be his own hype man. He's going to do, and he had this whole character thing to build up. We're starting all these illustrations. We're doing that, and then they had the releases and whatnot. And so he kept that mask going. That mask actually was initially, I don't know if it was going to be on WWE television. I'm not the one, I can't speak to that. But that mask actually started from there. So when he started doing AEW, I noticed he took the jaw off of it. And I had already been illustrating the mask. So I just took the jaw off my drawing, and we liked it enough, and that made it his first shirt when he came in. Well, not his first. His first was Daz's House of Black t-shirt. But anyway, the mask shirt was my first shirt with him. Same thing with Windham, is that they have these I'm sure an author could go, I could take it and write a book and story. I'm not an author. I would love to be. I have story ideas, but I'm not a writer.
Mm.
But to take it and say, you know, a graphic novel of some type, or almost a, you know, scary stories to tell in the dark kind of storybook kind of thing. I don't know, but there's something constantly brimming with this, that it's always there in the back of my head. I go through my artwork and there's Fiend faces everywhere, you know, and that it keeps you constantly kind of going. And that was the one thing we're actually discussing that we never quite illustrated, right up until the end there, was when released those illustrations of the mask for the comeback, which the last comeback, that weren't made or used. Those masks weren't supposed to be Fiend masks outright. That's why some of those drawings, you know, he was going to be in full hood the whole time. He was going to have the mask on. He was going to do that interchanging of the top and bottom to denote personality differentials, and if he needed to respond to the thing, the character could fit. If it was going to be funny or angry or whatnot. And then, so that was just Bray Wyatt in this mask, almost like something keeps morphing. This was Hickman. Something keeps morphing through, and then he goes, when we get to do the Fiend, it'll just be the nastiest, gnarliest thing anybody's ever seen. We have to go over the top with it and whatnot. That they released a supposed, what was going to be his Fiend look when he came back, right? I did a mouth or something. I can look at that and see similarities in some of the things that he was sending me. There was definitely some, you know, inspirations for stuff. I think one of the, like, first and foremost, he loved the masks from Mushroom Head, the band.
Yep.
And how they sort of, and that's what we're at, the piece I was designing. You know, we wanted the idea that some of the lower jaw could connect to the top in spots and have that symbiote kind of eager-esque look to some bio-organic kind of nature. He can move and interchange out, and that sounds like, you can do that. And he goes, that's not for you to worry about. You just draw it. We'll make it work over here. And so, you know, I don't know if that was going to be the direct representation of that, but I remember the mouth and all that kind of reminded me of one of those Mushroom Head masks that he would send me pictures of a lot, because he'd repeat the same picture. If you started a new conversation, he'd send you all those same old photos plus new ones, like a test. Like, are you trying to confuse me? So that he was always just go, go, go. But so I could always see those characters outside of wrestling, comics, books. I see it visually more than anything else. I would love to see films, because the Fiend is almost like it could be. I see the Fiend as a bit on that, call it cosmic-y horror type thing, and not strictly that, but it's fun to fantasize that Pennywise and the story of it is cosmic horror. It's almost Lovecraftian in nature. And I know not everyone loves the word Lovecraft, but, you know, bear with me. So it's just that, and I remember when I first heard that, I'm like, Pennywise is definitely like there's that shape shifting. I could definitely see it as a cosmic horror. So the Fiend, for me, not everybody, you know, somebody might be like, oh, it's a crazy evil ex-carnival guy and he's out to kill people. He's a slasher movie. Fine, that's cool. I saw it as something more than that, a little bit on that cosmic level. So he could be this monstrous hulking thing. It could be this gnarly little thing here. I don't know what. That's where the ideas kind of go all over the place. But there's got to be more that can be touched on with that. Hopefully I get a chance to.
One day, man, I'm hoping, as I'm sure many people are, I think it'd be fantastic. One of the things I always liked, and I know you expressed this in the previous interview, was that in a wrestling context, from what you mentioned, Windham didn't actually want it to be all hokey and spooky and stuff. Of course, out in pop culture, the Fiend could have been anything, could have been a cosmic horror thing, but in a wrestling context, it was all supposed to be in his brain, right? And he was going to play all the characters. I love that, because I think that's what, from what I can see of what's happening now with Taylor and the Uncle Howdy stuff, I feel like it's going to be more psychological, and that feels like, from my point as a fan, closer to the vision that Windham wanted. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know, and I'm sure that if I can tell you all this, they can tell you way more than I could, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not telling anybody anything that, you know, who knew him well wouldn't already know. So that being said, I mean, I'm sure that his brother and family and anyone else associated with it would already know that better than I would, and would certainly are not going to do anything that's now. That being said, that's maybe what they know, but what a writer sitting in an office in a boardroom writing a show, whatever they do, might not see it right, and he might be running back into that same rocking the hard place scenario. So ultimately, I just hope it works out.
Yeah, me too, man.
For all parties involved for a number of reasons. But yeah, it's in memory of him too. Just do it right.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed. Right, it's the roundup questions, because obviously you mentioned that you work with Malakai Black in AEW. I'll forever be grateful. Malakai Black gave me an hour of his time, and normally with the AEW stuff, you talk about systems and things. I usually get a certain amount of minutes, and Malakai Black and I had like an hour to talk about the vision. He's great, really interesting. What is it like? Because you do Malakai Black, you've done Max the Impaler in NWA, really cool characters. The Briscoes, of course. I saw a lovely tweet where you mentioned working with the Briscoes because you grew up as a fan, and so and this isn't meant to be a WWE versus AEW. What's it like?
No,
back here, but like, how have you enjoyed the House of Black stuff, the Briscoe stuff, Maxie Pella, the other creative projects you've had in wrestling?
Well, just with the Briscoe stuff, that was going to be, unfortunately, after Jay's passing. Malakai wanted to do a shirt, proceeds go to his wife and kids kind of thing. And right after I completed it, we were going to do it through Black Mass. And I don't know, he'd be the one to have to answer how that would all work out. But that's just, I remember he felt compelled. He wanted to do that for them too, and his love for those guys. And again, I going back to Ring of Honor shows as a fan, and the early 2000s and whatnot, and the Briscoes were big, and so that one hit me hard when Jay left. So I was super happy to do it, and we put it together. And right around that same time is when AEW had their Jay Briscoe shirt, and Malakai was like, I don't want to put that out, and that confused the issue and whatnot. So it just became, but then whenever, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name, whatever the pay-per-view was that AEW just had in St. Louis, the last pay-per-view, not.
I'm trying to remember as well.
Anyway. Yeah, I'm blanking. But okay. Whatever the name of that show was, it's when Swerve won the title. But that show, he was kind enough to him and Brody had my wife and I backstage. So we're just kind of loitering backstage and just walking around. And so I got to run into Mark, and I wasn't harassing anybody. Like it's hard, especially certain people. Like you see all the talent, and everyone's great talent. You're fans of it, but I'm old, so whenever good old JR walks by, it's hard not to want to be like, "I take my picture with you." So one of the only people, though, that I asked, really the only, I took a shot with Tom for all the work I've done with Malakai. And the one time we were in the same room together, I was tattooing Buddy, so I just didn't grab a shot with him or anything, or just say, hey. So that was it. So I grabbed a quick picture with him and Brody. But the only other picture I took, grabbed a selfie with, was Mark Briscoe, who I just kind of, whatever. I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, hey, I'm really sorry to bother you, because I'm backstage. You guys are not expected to be bothered by weirdos like me. I said, so I just kind of quickly spoke to my reverence for him and Jay, and just, how much that they really hurt, and all love to his family, and God bless him and everything. And he was extremely, extremely sweet, as I always knew he was, and everyone spoke to it. But I said, one more thing, I'm so sorry if I grab a picture. He goes, absolutely. And he grabbed, patted me on the back and stuff. So whatever, as a fan, you meet someone like that, that's when it's like, God, that was even better than I could have ever, such a sweet guy. The whole interaction was less than a minute, if not less than 30 seconds. And but it was totally worth it. That and Jerry ECW. Yeah. We was around the second match in the card was the House of Black, and they worked Copeland and Kingston and Mark. And so they went out, and I had somebody come up, and they said, so they brought us out through wardrobe to the side of the stage to stand on the floor by the entrance stage to watch the House of Black match. And so that was shoot, I apologize, I lost what I was bringing it up for.
It's okay. We were talking about the Briscoes and that memory, and then also obviously you work with House of Black, and just like
I said Jerry Lynn. That's like Jerry Lynn. So on the way out there, Jerry Lynn was standing there. He's doing the production and all that kind of stuff, and I saw him, and I just, all my cool just went out the window. And the funny part is I didn't expect to run into him there. It was the night before, 2 nights before, I happened to just be digging through the Peacock app, and I was watching whatever ECW show with him and RVD and one of their old classics back in the day. So I was just watching his match. I was just showing it to my youngest. I was like, "What's this?" And I was playing a Jerry Lynn match. So then for us to walk out to see the House of Black match at the AEW pay-per-view Dynasty, I think it's called. There's Jerry Lynn, and I just went over and shook his hand and started speaking a mile a minute. I felt so corny, but he was so gracious. And then I just started walking away as fast as possible. And he stopped me. He goes, "What's your name?" I didn't even give him my name. I just kind of just word vomited a bunch of praise at him. This poor guy's just doing his job. The last thing in the world I think he's expecting to run into is like a wrestling fan. So that was funny. But
yeah,
so I didn't really want to bother anyone backstage at the show or whatnot. But
cool memory.
What was your?
Yeah, it was a cool memory. We were talking about the work, and obviously working across, because you've done stuff with Max the Impaler as well, and just enjoyable creative projects. But it sounds like the House of Black stuff has really been.
Creativity is different. It's with them when you're doing stuff. My WWE stuff was you had the mask, you had the lantern that they had to. So that wasn't. I was working with Windham, of course, that they just had to buy that.
Mm-hmm.
After that, the direct commissions of work was doing a design for Randy Orton, which was rad because Randy and I knew each other a little bit. I got to tattoo him years ago, and I had to redo his sleeves. He wasn't happy with the first round of them, so I did those. That was 2011.
Wow. Yeah.
Been a minute. So not that we stayed in touch a ton or anything, but knew him from that. So they asked to do that shirt there, which that debuted the night. So it was I had tattooed Windham on Sunday evening. That Monday he brought wife and I to the show. That's when I saw the release of the Randy Orton shirt. So it puts any context, because it was right after that he wrestled the dark match and stuff with Seth, and right after that they hopped the plane and went to that first Saudi show where the Fiend won the title. So this was right before that title run. That's how I remember it in my head. So I did that shirt with Randy. I did an Undertaker print for the 30-year anniversary of the Dead Man, I believe they called it. So they reached out to do a design for that. So just did a post shot of him. So it's pretty corporate. WWE is pretty straightforward. And they're real secure about what they own and how that kind of stuff works. And famously, they own the character, unless there's in particular talent have different contracts, but by and large, they own the character. They own everything. They control all that. With AEW, the talent has more wiggle room in that. Malakai is able to sell House of Black and still gets to maintain the IP, I believe, if I'm speaking correctly here. So he's allowed, within reason, I'm in a working relationship with Tony Khan to use House of Black through his clothing line. And we can design and sell Malakai Black and Brody King and Buddy Matthew. We can sell shirts through that for those, but as long as we're also providing for Shop AEW and Pro Wrestling Tees and whatnot. So by and large, that's been the largest collection of work, is working through that. So them tattooed Vincent with the Righteous, him and Dutch. Got to know those guys pretty well, and done some design stuff there. We met around the time right towards the end of Ring of Honor, and Vincent was on his way. He was going to be the ROH champion, actually, and COVID messed all that up. And not so much just COVID; they were wrestling through COVID, but post-COVID, when the company was sold and went under, and so that kind of stymied a lot of that. But I stayed in touch and get to do some fun side stuff with him, and some shirt design. So when it comes to working with AEW, there was a completely different animal, because the talent has more opportunities to, I think, be in control of themselves a little bit more. It's not so corporately controlled. So you get a little more freedom with that. First thing was Tama Tonga back in New Japan. That was also had nothing to do with New Japan. It was, he wanted to and actually that was a fun little quip, that he wanted to redesign the very famous Bullet Club logo.
Right.
Because I want to do a new one. And I was like, they want you to do one? He goes, no, but I want to do one. So he wanted to start designing. I was like, so I just thought, I don't know if they're going to let you completely revamp this globally bought and very popular item. Everyone was wearing Bullet Club merchandise in 2016, whatever it was. And I was like, dude, they're not going to let you do that. But, so everyone's, it's since it's independent contracting work, I mean, most of the talent has kind of control over that. The WWE, you don't. It's really, they have, unless anything's changed recently, I don't know, but they keep the control over that stuff. that's what made Windham unique, is that they're pushing back, and he's kind of like got me like, here, draw that. Let's keep showing. That's what it felt like. It was, I'm working for him. He
Yeah.
would ask me to illustrate these things to help them, to help part of that pushback. So that's why I would, what happens on TV would have virtually no real correlation to myself, because it depends on what they pick and choose to go with.
Yeah.
I'm not signed to do it with them. So it's kind of like being Wyndham's friend who draws. That was what it kind of came down to a lot of ways as well.
Yeah,
So,
I like that, man. I like
and
that.
that's fine. I was fine with that.
Yeah, I think it speaks to that emotional connection. And just, as we finish, this is the journalistic part of me. Is there anything that you can share with me project wise? Anything that you want to promote or touch on that I might have missed before we finish up today?
No, I think I've said this before. I owe Wyndham so much, since we are talking about him so much here as well. But because I can draw and I can connect that line of how that shoot your shot tweet was brought me to where you and I wouldn't be talking right now if I didn't do that. The work I'm doing heavily right now is have been producing a lot of work and continue to produce a lot of work while tattooing full time with Monty Cook Games, and doing a lot of that. I guess I had my head in the sand a bit. We did in when the Old Gods of Appalachia tabletop game came out. That all tied in because the Old Gods knew who I was from my artwork. I knew who they were because coming across their podcast and loving the subject matter and having an idea similar to what they did, but based here where I'm at. And they had this, and I'm not, again, they're way more creative. I'm like, this is a way cooler idea than anything I ever had. So, and he's a massive fan of, he's a wrestling fan, Steve Shell, one of the creators of that, along with Cam. Steve's a big wrestling fan, loves the House of Black stuff. So one of those small world things, he liked what I was doing. It's like, you like this, that, and the other. They're making a game. He says, hey, they need some illustrations. They liked my style fit what, he liked it for their podcast, for the Old God stuff. So we want that style in the book. And so that got me working with Monty Cook. That relationship went well. So then beyond that, now, like I said earlier, with Rusty Quill is a company, but they have the Magnus Archives podcast that's based over UK, and they got a game that they're working on with Monty Cook Games. They have a Magnus Archives, which they put all the Kickstarter stuff out for that. So doing a bunch of illustrations for that. I got to design a book within a book for any Magnus Archives fans that might, I don't know. I didn't know how popular it was. I fully admit I feel like a bit of a fraud sometimes, because I'll work for something and I have friends, people I know. I got my buddies' kids who grew up in their 20s now, and they're saying, you were doing stuff, man. I love that podcast. Oh my God. I'm like, oh, you're a fan of it? Oh, huge. So it's really, really cool when you get that feedback from it.
Yeah, man.
But there's a book within that story that I got to illustrate, and they're going to make a physical copy of for the game itself. So, I got to draw a book. I got to draw a messed up children's book. I get to, the Old Gods, I got to do the cover art for that book, and it was very well received. I was happy to see, and all that kind of stuff. So none of this, at least in this linear timeline, none of this that I've done can't not be connected back to, if I'm saying that right, to Windham and taking that chance. But then, it's great to open a door, but you got to be able to produce, and you got to be able to do the work, and sometimes take those big losses too, because you can work really hard on something you love. And I've done it numerous times, and that talent or that publishing company or this company or whatever may just go, no. And you're just like, boy, it's learn to take it and keep rolling.
Keep rolling. Yeah. And that's wonderful advice. And going back to just squeezing this one in, the shoot the shot thing, I think that's a really nice moment that we started with and to end with. Are you saying to every young person that they should shoot their shot? And, I'm not talking about, because again, there are ways to do it, DMs on Instagram.
You're right. It's hard. Yeah.
What do you, if you were talking to any young person who admires your work and admires, exactly everything you're saying today, and you've graciously given me your time, Kyle, shooting the shot, do you do it? How do you do it? What would you say to any young person to do that?
unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all answer. There's that, obviously, kind of like you're already kind of referencing there.
Yeah.
It's like there's ways to do it and whatnot. And I think it's a case by case basis on what's the best approach. But then again, I also, if we can quote Michael Scott and say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. It's Wayne Gretzky, of course, but that's true too. If you don't take the opportunity to try, you're definitely not. If you have a dream, if you have something you want to accomplish, if you have anyone of note that you want to work with, and you hope it happens one day, well, if you never make an effort at some point somehow, it definitely never will. So, but there's the easy answer is should you? Yeah, you should somehow. Whether or not you do it the right way, whether you can do it and back it up, whether you just do what I did, which I just consider myself extremely lucky. I can believe that my worth, I hope that my ability, or I provide value to a customer, to a client. In that case, a client can be someone of note, someone who performs on television. I have to be able to provide to them a value, something that they can turn around that benefits them in their position. You have to be able to put the work in. But that being said, it's kind of like, you can be a talented poker player, but sometimes winning is about luck. And so you can go down, you just luck out sometimes. And if you don't feel like your moment's happened yet, the last thing you should do is quit. But sometimes you just kind of get lucky. And that's how I feel. I took a chance to message, not even really, I was talking to Tyler Bate. I wasn't even directly talking to Windham. I think I did maybe one time years back, something online, but how that goes.
Yeah.
And so the tweet in question was actually directed at the time as a response to Tyler Bate, if memory serves, because he had just gotten a forearm tattoo done. And I wasn't even usually the person to get online and say that kind of stuff, but for some reason that day I did.
Yeah.
And I happened to like passive aggressively at WWE Bray Wyatt, whatever his handle was at the time. And here we are. So
there you go, man. There you go.
I can't give that advice to anybody. What you should definitely do is just tweet people randomly and do it all the time. Like, sometimes it doesn't work, but
there you go. Sometimes it does. Like I say, I've had those experiences myself, and I always think, there are channels to do it and correct channels to do it, but absolutely is worth shooting the shot. I got to do that with. We tried to expand into film and TV, and I shot my shot with David Dasmalchian from Late Night with the Devil, and literally reached out to his people because he's a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. He's a huge music fan, and there it was. And now we've got, we're doing stuff with Disney and all this other stuff. So there's an example there. And I also shot my shot reaching out to you again to do this. So thank you so much, because I've been trying to do this for a while. So thank you, Kyle, and thank you for giving me so much of your time. I look forward to doing this again with you. Really appreciate it, man.
Anytime. I appreciate it.